Welcome back to the Pathogen Murder Mystery series. This time we're going to start looking at assembly. To me, this is where all the action starts happening. So just to remind ourselves, when you're doing a genomic analysis, it's always good to start with read quality, which we did, to determine if your data is even good enough to continue with. I also showed you how to identify a potential pathogen from the reads using the Kraken-2 database. The last one, we were able to identify the serotype of our pathogen from the reads. And now we're getting into the assembly. We're starting to create a genome. So you may say, why even do an assembly? We know who it is. It's E. coli. The lab test showed that it's got these bad Shiga toxin genes, or at least one of them, right? It didn't agglutinate this polyvalent serum, so we know it's something unusual. And we already did some sequencing and we showed that it was able to identify the serotype as O104H4. So we know who it is. So why go any further? Why do any sequencing? Let's just go after it this way. Well, remember that this thing is unusual and the people are getting really, really sick. So we need to know, does it have some special genes? What do we need to do to stop this thing? Often sequencing is faster to locate the source of infection. So if we start sequencing everybody that's coming in with it and looking at the way the pathogen is spreading through the population, we can backtrack and find out where it started and maybe cut off the source. But the whole thing is we're trying to build better fingerprints so we can identify the source of the infection. So sequencing is really good for that. So basically, what is an assembly? Well, you start with reads. And then when you start the assembly, it creates contigs. So it's saying these reads all go together, they overlap, and they go like this, and this is one contig, and I can't figure out anything more from that. So you've got a series of contigs, and then you look for patterns in those contigs and generate those together, and that becomes the scaffold. And sometimes you'll have a number of scaffolds, and you can put them together, and maybe if you're very lucky, you can get one large contig from your assembly that matches your chromosome. Now, that doesn't often happen. Often you're stuck with this situation with a number of scaffolds, not that overlap, so that you'll get a sense of how big it is, but it takes some good sequencing and some good bioinformatics to get something that matches the chromosome. So there are two types of assemblies you can do: reference-based, where you say, I have this genome, and I just want to lay my reads against that and assemble them in the exact same order. When you're going through a pandemic, maybe that's an okay thing to do, but generally we don't know how the organism has assembled itself. So relying on another organism to say this is how this one is generally can sometimes be a problem. A lot of the time we do what's called de novo assembly, where you're assembling them just from the reads themselves and you're not making any prior decisions as to what the order of those genes should be. So computers are really good at this because remember, you'll have millions of these reads and computers can find them and piece them all together. So there are a number of pipelines that you can use to assemble genomes, and it often depends upon the types of reads that you have, where you had your sequencing done. If you have short reads like Illumina, you can use two assembly pipelines that are spades and unicycler. I really like unicycler, which is just like super spades. If you have long reads like PacBio or nanopore reads, and nanopore is becoming really predominant in the sequencing, you can use a long read assembler like Canoe or Fly. And often what people are doing these days is you get the long reads done, and the long reads generally are long, right? But they're not too good on the details. And then you use the short reads on top of that. and it's a kind of mapping of the short reads over it to fill in the gaps, and that's called a hybrid assembly. And there are two programs that are currently in use to do that, which are Unicycler and Canoe. Now, this is 2023. In 2024, there might be other methods, because as the sequencing methods evolve, so do the assembly methods. So, keep your eye on what the current things are that people are doing. So let's generate a genome assembly. And to do this, we're going back to BBBRC, just because for me, it's really easy. There are other places that one can do genome assemblies. Genome Tracker, I believe, has one. I know that KBase has one, but I find this one to be really easy. So here we are back at the resource, and let's go into Tools and Services, and we'll go into genome assembly. And this should all be old news to you because you've seen me do it before. So we're going to migrate to where in your workspace you put the reads, and I'm migrating to where in mine I put the reads. So I have to click on the column heads to resort so I can find the file I created most recently. I click on that folder, and there's the first read. Then it appears in the box, and then I've got to get the second read. So I migrate back to the same place, and there it is. Get it in the box, and then remember, you've got to move it over into the selected libraries box. So we click there, and there it is, but we can't assemble yet. We have more things that we have to fill out. If I were to do a hybrid assembly, I would load a long read sequence here and then migrate that over. You can just let the service determine your reads and what it should be used, or you could choose one you like. I like Unicycler. I'm going to put it in the output folder that I like, and I'll call it Mystery Reads Unicycler. So I could assemble now, but we could also look if we wanted to trim the reads before assembly, if we wanted to set the minimum length or the coverage config, and these, the Racon and Pylon iterations. What generally happens during an assembly is it has a first run, and it creates a number of contigs, and it's starting to scaffold it. And then it can go back and say, there are some areas that it's a little weak in. And so it does, in the case of short reads, what it's called a pylon iteration. So it brings those reads back in to see if it could get a little bit better assembly. And so it's doing that a couple of times. That's set as the default. You could go up to 4 or 5, but all of that makes it take longer. And so we would click the assemble button and send the assembly off. And then it says it's submitting the job. And it says it's queued. And so you'd have to go to your jobs list to see how it's running. Now, let me point out that there are bioinformatic pipelines that take a lot of time. Assembly is one, phylogenetic trees is another, and RNA-seq analysis. So don't expect this to happen right away. It can take up to a day depending upon how big the file size is for this job to complete. And if there are a lot of people working, you may have to wait. But generally, they say if you haven't seen any progress in 24 hours to let the people here know. So I don't want to overwhelm you. So this one is just about submitting the job. And see how easy that was? You don't have to be a computer scientist to do this. You don't have to do this through command line. It's very simple to do it here. Let's go back to our slides. Not that there's that much more to say here. We did our demo. And then next, we're going to look at that assembly and interpret it. So I really appreciate your sticking in, and join me next time to look at the assembly and try to figure out if it's any good or not. Thanks a lot. Bye.